Hey, so tonight we're going to venture into the velvet-draped, gas-lit parlours of the past, peeling back the layers of Victorian respectability to uncover what truly simmered beneath their buttoned-up exteriors. Forget the romanticised images of dainty tea parties and moral rectitude. We're diving into the messy, often brutal, and utterly fascinating reality. Before we do, just a quick ask. If you're enjoying these journeys, please hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It really helps me bring more of these stories to life. Alright, find that cozy spot, maybe tuck a blanket around you, dim the lights, and let's unravel the secret obsessions of the Victorians. You find yourself in a world where death wasn't a hushed private affair, whisked away to a distant hospital or a sterile funeral home. No, for the Victorians, death was an ever-present, tangible guest, often arriving unannounced and lingering in the very air of your home. Imagine, if you will, the constant low thrum of sorrow that permeated society, a societal hum born of a relentless mortality rate that snatched children, young mothers, and men in their prime without a moment's notice. You're living in an era where infectious diseases, cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis, swept through cities like malevolent spectres, leaving empty chairs at the dinner table and silent nurseries in their wake. This wasn't some abstract concept you read in a history book. It was the smell that clung to the fabric of your curtains, the pallor on your neighbour's face, the sudden, terrifying cough of a loved one that echoed in the quiet hours of the night. The obsession with death wasn't morbid in the way we might perceive it today, a ghoulish delight in the gruesome. No, for them, it was a desperate, almost devotional embrace of the inevitable, a valiant attempt to assert control and meaning in the face of uncontrollable loss. When death finally entered your home, it transformed everything. The entire household plunged into a carefully orchestrated ritual of grief, a performance of sorrow that was as rigid and demanding as any social season. You'd feel the sudden stillness descend, a profound silence broken only by the muffled sobs of your mother, the creak of a carriage outside bringing the undertaker, or the low murmur of prayers. Every mirror in the house would be covered with black cloth, lest the departed spirit become trapped or, worse, catch sight of the grieving and be disturbed. Clocks would be stopped at the precise moment of passing, a poignant, futile gesture against the relentless march of time that continued even as your world stood still. The body, your loved one's body, would remain in the house for days, often laid out in the front parlour, a silent sentinel amidst the unfolding drama of mourning. You'd smell the faint, sweet scent of flowers trying to mask the inevitable, the heavy perfume of lilies and tuberoses fighting a losing battle against the more primal odours that whispered of decay, especially in the warmer months. Imagine the chill that would creep into your bones as you passed the open door of that room, catching a glimpse of the still form, perhaps your grandmother, her face serene, her hands clasped, but utterly, irrevocably still. This wasn't a distant viewing in a funeral home. This was death, palpable and present, sharing your living space. Then came the rituals of remembrance, practices that would strike your modern sensibilities as deeply unsettling, perhaps even bizarre. Post-mortem photography, for instance. For you, a photograph is a snapshot of life, vibrant and fleeting. For the Victorians, it was often the only visual record they would ever possess of a beloved child, a cherished parent, a lost spouse. So, after death, photographers would be called to pose the deceased, sometimes alone in their coffins, sometimes propped up in chairs, their eyes often painted open on the photograph itself to simulate life, or held in the arms of grieving family members, a last desperate attempt to capture a memory before decay claimed their visage forever. You would look into the lens, perhaps holding your infant sister, her tiny face pale and peaceful, and know that this image, this frozen moment, was all that remained. The very act of taking the photo was itself a somber tableau. The photographer, shrouded under his black cloth, the flash a brief, eerie burst of light illuminating the grief-stricken faces.
And the hair, dear listener, the hair. It wasn't merely a remnant, it was a living relic, a tangible connection to the departed. You'd see it meticulously coiled, braided, and woven into intricate patterns. Rings, brooches, lockets, even elaborate wreaths displayed under glass domes.
Imagine wearing a brooch, heavy with the braided tresses of your deceased husband, close to your heart, feeling the subtle weight and texture of it against your skin throughout your days. Or perhaps, as a young woman, you'd contribute a lock of your own hair to be woven into a piece for your recently departed mother, a shared, physical bond maintained even in separation. This wasn't just sentimentality, it was a deeply ingrained belief in the power of physical connection, a refusal to let go entirely. The crafting of these items was an industry in itself, skilled artisans transforming sorrow into wearable art, ensuring that a part of the loved one literally remained with the grieving. Mourning attire, too, was an entire language of grief, a complex code of black and crepe that dictated your very public existence for years. If you were a widow, you were expected to wear widow's weeds, heavy, somber black garments, often made of crepe, a dull, unreflective fabric designed to absorb light and hope, for a full year and a day of deep mourning. After that, you could transition to second mourning, which might involve less severe black, perhaps with some white trim, then half mourning with greys, lavenders, and mauves, before finally re-emerging into the world of colour. This wasn't a choice, it was a societal imperative. You would feel the oppressive weight of the heavy fabric, the scratchiness of the crepe against your skin, the stifling heat of the wool in summer, a constant physical manifestation of your sorrow. Every public appearance was a statement of your grief, a silent plea for sympathy, and a stark reminder of your loss. Shops specialized in mourning wear, ensuring that every detail, from your bonnet to your parasol to your gloves, conveyed the appropriate level of sorrow. The graveyards themselves were not merely places of interment, but elaborate gardens of remembrance, architectural spectacles designed to honor the dead and provide solace to the living. You'd take Sunday strolls through these cities of the dead, admiring the grand mausoleums, the weeping angels carved from cold marble, the intricate epitaphs that chronicled lives and expressed profound sorrow. This was a public display of wealth, status, and piety. Yes, but it was also a place for contemplation, for connection. You'd often bring picnics, turning a visit to your ancestors into a family outing, a way to keep their memory alive and integrated into your daily life. The very ground beneath your feet, therefore, was saturated with history, with stories, with the constant presence of those who had gone before. This pervasive presence of death meant that the Victorians were constantly confronting their own mortality. For you, death is often a distant concept, something that happens to others far away, in sterile environments. For them, it was a daily
reality, a spectre that could claim anyone at any time.
This inescapable truth fostered a unique blend of stoicism and an almost desperate hope for the afterlife. Spiritualism, the belief in communicating with the dead, exploded in popularity, offering a tantalizing, albeit often fraudulent, promise of connection beyond the veil. Imagine sitting in a darkened parlor, your hand resting on a polished oak table, waiting for a ghostly knock or a whispered message from your lost loved one, desperate for any sign that they still existed, that their journey wasn't truly over. You see, for the Victorians, death wasn't an ending, it was a transition, a profound passage that demanded respect, elaborate ritual, and unwavering remembrance. It shaped their art, their literature, their architecture, their fashion, and their very conception of life. It was a mirror reflecting their deepest fears and their most fervent hopes, a constant, tangible reminder of the fragility of existence and the enduring power of love. And as you reflect on this, perhaps you'll appreciate the silent, sanitized passing of life today, a contrast that highlights just how profoundly different your relationship with death is compared to theirs, a secret obsession that colored every single facet of their existence. Now let's step into the dimly lit alleyways and shadowed corners of Victorian society, a realm meticulously hidden beneath the pristine facade of respectability, yet pulsating with a very different kind of life. Tonight, we're going to explore what the Victorians were secretly obsessed with, an obsession that contradicted their public declarations of moral purity in the most visceral way. The sprawling, tenacious industries of pornography and prostitution. You, living in an age of instant access and open discussion, might find it hard to comprehend the sheer scale and ingenuity of this hidden world, a world they vehemently denied but clandestinely consumed. Imagine yourself in a bustling city like London, a beacon of progress and piety. You walk past grand churches, stately homes, and philanthropic institutions, all symbols of an age striving for moral perfection. But as dusk descends, a different city emerges. The gaslights flicker, casting long shadows that conceal transactions and desires deemed unspeakable in daylight. You're navigating a society where sex was rarely discussed, where women were depicted as ethereal, passionless beings, and where prudery was a cardinal virtue. Yet behind closed doors, in the folds of heavy velvet curtains and under the cover of night, a voracious appetite for sexual escapism flourished. Let's talk about prostitution first, because it was the most visible, albeit officially ignored, manifestation of this hidden obsession. You'd encounter them everywhere, from the desperate streetwalkers shivering in the biting fog of a winter night, offering themselves for a few pennies, to the elegant dames du monde in opulent brothels, their services commanding sums that could support a family for months. You, as a respectable citizen, would pretend not to see them, avert your gaze, walk faster. But their presence was undeniable, a living testament to the vast economic disparities and the profound hypocrisy of the age. Many women facing starvation wages in factories or domestic service had no other recourse. For them, it wasn't a choice but a grim survival strategy, a direct consequence of a society that offered few avenues for independent female sustenance. You might feel a pang of pity or perhaps disgust as you hurried past, but you couldn't deny their existence. The brothels themselves were a stratified landscape, reflecting the rigid class system outside their doors. You could find dingy doss houses where women worked in squalor, often under the thumb of cruel madams catering to the poorest labourers. Or you might venture, as a man, into a lavish establishment in the West End, a seraglio or house of ill repute, where French champagne flowed, music played, and exquisitely dressed women waited in perfumed drawing rooms. These establishments often operated with a wink and a nod from local authorities, who were either complicit or powerless to stem the tide. Imagine the hushed whispers, the clinking of glasses, the heavy scent of cigars and expensive perfumes mingling with the more primal scent of human desire. You would feel the illicit thrill of transgressing societal norms, the danger of being discovered, adding to the forbidden allure. Now for the secret part, the vast and ingenious industry of pornography. In a time when explicit material was illegal, its creation and distribution were elaborate, clandestine operations. You might picture crude drawings, but the reality was far more sophisticated. The Victorians were masters of evasion. Publishers would print medical texts with highly detailed anatomical drawings that veered sharply into the erotic. Travelogues would describe the exotic, sexual customs of foreign lands in titillating detail. Even seemingly innocent art studies of nudes could be thinly veiled excuses for pornography. You, as a curious gentleman, might discreetly inquire at a particular bookshop, using a coded phrase, to gain access to a back room filled with forbidden treasures. The explosion of photography in the mid-19th century revolutionized this hidden industry. Daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, and later carte de visite allowed for the mass production of explicit images. Imagine holding a small, delicate card in your hand, perhaps of a woman artfully draped or engaged in more explicit acts, feeling the smooth cardboard, the subtle sheen of the image. These weren't just for shock value. They were highly sought after. Photographers would set up secret studios, often disguised as legitimate portrait businesses, employing models who were frequently prostitutes or desperate women. The dangers were immense: arrest, social ruin, even violence. But the demand was so powerful that the risks were often deemed worthwhile. You'd find French postcards smuggled in from the continent, miniature photographic prints depicting everything from discreet nudity to highly explicit scenes. These were easily concealed, perfect for the discreet gentleman or the curious lady. Yes, women too were consumers, though their access and ability to express such desires were even more constrained. For them, such material might have been a rare, stolen glimpse into a world of physical intimacy largely denied by societal expectations of frigidity and purity. The content itself was varied. Beyond simple nudity, you would find images depicting acts that challenged the very core of Victorian sexual repression. Same-sex encounters, sadomasochistic fantasies, and scenes of group sex. These revealed a rich, complex tapestry of desire that was brutally suppressed in public discourse. The very act of viewing such material was a rebellion, a silent scream against the suffocating morality of the era. You would feel the conflicting emotions, the shame, the guilt, the thrill of transgression, and perhaps a strange sense of liberation in witnessing what was forbidden. This obsession wasn't just about images. There was a thriving market for erotic literature, often published anonymously or under pseudonyms to evade prosecution. Novels, short stories, and poems explored themes of forbidden love, sexual adventure, and scandalous liaison. You might stumble upon a copy of My Secret Life, an anonymous 11-volume autobiography purportedly by a Victorian gentleman detailing his extensive sexual encounters. Reading it, you'd be plunged into a world of raw, unvarnished desire, a stark contrast to the polite romances sanctioned by society. The language itself would be a revelation, daring to describe what was usually left unsaid, using euphemisms that hinted at the explicit without always stating it directly. The existence of these vast industries reveals a profound schism in the Victorian psyche. On one hand, an unwavering commitment to moral rectitude, public decency, and the sanctity of marriage. On the other, a powerful, subterranean current of sexual desire that refused to be extinguished, finding expression in covert consumption and illicit encounters. You might ponder how such a society could maintain such a stark dichotomy. The answer lies in the intense pressure to conform, the devastating consequences of social disgrace, and the deeply ingrained double standard that allowed men far greater latitude in sexual matters than women. For the Victorian man, visiting a prostitute or consuming pornography was often seen as a necessary outlet, a way to protect the purity of his wife and family. His public virtue remained intact as long as his transgressions remained secret. For women, however, even a whisper of impropriety could mean utter social ruin.
You, as a woman of that era, would live in constant fear of discovery, of the gossip that could dismantle your entire existence.
This fear, this rigid control, only made the forbidden all the more tantalizing, even if access was severely limited. So, as you settle deeper into your comfortable present, reflect on this hidden aspect of Victorian life. It wasn't just a byproduct of their repression. It was an obsession that thrived because of it, a testament to the enduring power of human desire to find a way, no matter how clandestine, no matter how dangerous, to express itself. It reminds you that underneath even the most rigid and outwardly moralistic societies, the primal forces of human nature continue to surge, shaping a hidden reality that is often far more complex and compelling than the public narrative suggests. Tonight, we peel back another layer of the Victorian psyche, a fascinating obsession that soared in popularity amidst scientific progress and industrial might, spiritualism and the occult. You might imagine the Victorians as rigidly rational, grounded in empirical thought, but beneath that veneer of logic, a profound longing for the supernatural, for connection with the unseen, pulsed fiercely. It was an age of doubt, too, where traditional religious dogma clashed with Darwinian theory, leaving many feeling adrift, searching for answers beyond the established church. Imagine yourself in a dimly lit drawing room, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the gas-lit streets. The air is thick with anticipation, perhaps a faint scent of lavender or dried roses. You're seated at a polished mahogany table, your hands resting lightly upon its surface, your fingers just brushing those of strangers to your left and right. In the center sits a medium, often a woman, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow, preparing to bridge the chasm between the living and the dead. The Victorians, reeling from epidemic diseases and devastating wars, faced death constantly, as we discussed. This constant loss fueled a desperate yearning to connect with departed loved ones, to find comfort, to ascertain that death wasn't the final curtain. You'd hear stories, whispers really, of tables rapping out messages,
of disembodied voices speaking from the shadows, of objects moving without visible cause.
For you in your modern world, these might sound like parlor tricks, easily debunked illusions. But for many Victorians, steeped in a belief system that still allowed for the miraculous, these phenomena were evidence of a profound truth, that the veil between worlds was thin and communication was possible. The desperation for solace, for a sign that their lost child or spouse still existed, often overwhelmed any skepticism. Seances became a popular pastime, not just for the grieving, but for the curious, for those seeking sensation, and even for socialites eager to rub shoulders with the fashionable and unconventional. You might attend a seance at a private home, or even in a public hall, where celebrated mediums would perform astounding feats. You'd feel the prickle of fear, the thrill of the unknown, as the room grew colder, as a mysterious bell chimed, or as a disembodied hand seemed to brush against your cheek in the darkness. The atmosphere would be electric, with a mixture of hope, terror, and collective belief. The most famous mediums, like the Fox sisters in America or Daniel Douglas Home in Britain, became celebrities touring the world, captivating audiences with their supposed abilities to levitate, produce spectral hands, and communicate directly with spirits. You would read breathless accounts in newspapers debating the authenticity, eager to believe, or perhaps eager to expose the fraud. Many high-profile figures, including Queen Victoria herself, who reportedly tried to contact John Brown, Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, and Alfred Russel Wallace, co-discoverer of evolution, became ardent spiritualists. Their endorsement lent an air of credibility to the movement, making it even more irresistible. But it wasn't just about contacting the dead. Spiritualism blossomed into a broader fascination with the occult, with the hidden forces of the universe. The Victorians, while embracing scientific advancements, also felt a deep spiritual hunger, a desire to understand the mysteries that science couldn't yet explain. You'd find people dabbling in mesmerism, a precursor to hypnotism, believing in its power to heal and control minds. Phrenology, the pseudo-science of reading character from skull bumps, was widely popular, and you might even have your own head examined, eager to uncover hidden talents or traits. Palmistry, astrology, and various forms of divination offered glimpses into fate and personality, providing a sense of order in a rapidly changing world. The Victorian era also saw a resurgence of interest in ancient mystical traditions, secret societies and esoteric knowledge. You'd encounter groups like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, an influential magical order that attracted intellectuals and artists, exploring ceremonial magic, alchemy, and the Kabbalah. They sought to understand the universe through ancient symbols and rituals, believing in a hidden wisdom that could grant them power and enlightenment. Imagine the elaborate costumes, the complex ceremonies, the sense of belonging to an exclusive group possessing secret knowledge, a stark contrast to the mundane industrial world outside. The fascination with ghosts and hauntings, too, was woven deeply into the fabric of Victorian culture. You'd tell ghost stories by the flickering firelight on dark winter nights, the tales of spectral ladies, rattling chains, and restless spirits sending shivers down your spine. Gothic literature, with its decaying mansions, tormented souls, and supernatural occurrences, was incredibly popular, reflecting and fueling this cultural preoccupation. You'd feel the hairs on your arms stand up as you read of a figure gliding through a moonlit corridor, a chilling parallel to the real-life anxieties about what lay beyond the grave. This embrace of the unseen was not without its critics. Many saw spiritualism as a dangerous delusion, a breeding ground for fraud and emotional exploitation. Committees were formed, often by scientists, to investigate mediums and expose their tricks. You'd read newspaper articles detailing the ingenious ways in which mediums produced their phenomena: hidden wires, sliding panels, confederates, even the simple power of suggestion in a darkened room. Yet despite the exposés, the belief persisted, sometimes even strengthened, as devotees dismissed the debunkers as narrow-minded or simply incapable of understanding true spiritual power. For you, today, the idea of communicating with spirits might seem quaint or even absurd, easily dismissed by scientific understanding. But for the Victorians, it offered something profound: comfort in loss, a sense of agency in a world often beyond their control, and a thrilling escape from the mundane. It allowed them to confront their deepest fears about mortality, to seek meaning beyond the material, and to explore the limits of human perception. So, as you drift towards sleep, consider this peculiar Victorian obsession. It reveals a humanity that, even amidst unprecedented technological advancement, still yearned for magic, for mystery, for proof that there was more to existence than what met the eye. It's a reminder that even the most rational of ages harbors a powerful, enduring need for the transcendent, for a belief in worlds unseen, a secret longing that shaped their nights and haunted their dreams. Tonight, we pull back the lace curtain on another deeply ingrained, yet often whispered about, Victorian obsession, the widespread and surprisingly open use of opium and its potent derivative, laudanum. You might associate drug addiction with the darker corners of your modern society, a tragic consequence of illicit substances. But for the Victorians, these powerful narcotics were as readily available as tea, often prescribed by doctors, purchased in chemists' shops, and consumed by every stratum of society, from the working poor to the genteel lady in her parlour. Imagine yourself strolling through a bustling Victorian street. You pass a chemist's shop, its window displaying an array of tonics, elixirs, and patent medicines. Among them, openly advertised, might be Godfrey's cordial for children, a mixture often heavily laced with opium, designed to soothe restless infants, effectively sedating them into silence. Or perhaps Dover's powder, a common remedy for colds and fevers, also opium-based. You wouldn't think twice about purchasing such a remedy for yourself or your family. It was considered a benevolent medicine, a panacea for countless ailments, far from the stigmatized substance you know today. The pervasive misery of Victorian life created a fertile ground for such widespread use. You're living in an era without effective painkillers, without antibiotics, without modern anesthetics. Chronic pain from injuries sustained in factories or mines, the relentless ache of rheumatism, the burning fever of tuberculosis, the searing agony of childbirth. all were a constant, brutal reality. When your teeth ached, your stomach seized with cramps, or your cough racked your body, opium offered a swift, almost miraculous respite. Imagine the profound relief, the blessed escape from torment, as the warm, fuzzy embrace of the drug dulled your senses and transported you, if only for a few hours, to a realm free of pain. Laudanum, a solution of opium dissolved in alcohol, was particularly popular. It was cheap, potent, and easily administered. You could buy it by the spoonful in any chemist's shop for a few pence. Women often used it to cope with the vapors, the anxieties and depressions that stemmed from societal constraints, monotonous domestic lives, and the constant stress of managing a large household. Imagine the quiet despair of a woman trapped in a stifling marriage, or overwhelmed by the demands of motherhood, finding solace in a small sip of this bittersweet liquid. Feeling the world soften, her worries recede into a hazy, comforting oblivion. For the working classes, especially those toiling in dark, dangerous factories or enduring crushing poverty, opium offered not just pain relief, but a temporary escape from the grim realities of their existence. You might see a weary factory worker, his hands scarred and blistered, purchasing a small dose at the end of a grueling 12-hour shift, seeking a few hours of dreamless sleep or a brief respite from hunger. For them, it was a practical solution, a cheap form of self-medication in a society that offered little in the way of social welfare or mental health support. The side effects, the insidious grip of addiction, were poorly understood or simply ignored. You wouldn't connect your growing dependence, the nausea, the sweats, the uncontrollable cravings when you missed a dose, with the innocent tonic you were taking. Doctors, too, were largely ignorant of the long-term consequences, prescribing it freely for everything from headaches to hysteria. The term addiction, as we understand it, was barely conceptualized, and its moral implications were overshadowed by the perceived benefits of pain relief and sedation. This open availability meant that many Victorians, often unknowingly, developed severe dependencies. You might be a respectable middle-class housewife, relying on your daily dose of laudanum to calm your nerves, ease your migraines, or simply manage the constant low-level anxiety of your life. The slow, gradual increase in dosage, the subtle shift from occasional use to daily necessity, would go largely unremarked upon, considered merely a necessary part of managing your health. Your family might even praise your steadiness or calm demeanor, unaware of the chemical basis of your placidity. The literary world reflected this pervasive presence. You would read tales of opium dens, particularly those in London's East End, frequented by sailors, artists, and slumming gentry seeking exotic thrills. Charles Dickens, for example, vividly described the Lascar's opium den in The Mystery of Edwin Drood, painting a picture of smoky squalor and spectral figures lost in their reveries. Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, a paragon of rationality, famously used cocaine and, implicitly, opium to stimulate his mind or escape boredom, a detail that speaks volumes about the era's attitudes towards such substances. Thomas de Quincey's Confessions of an English Opium Eater offered a gripping and often disturbing first-person account of both the rapturous highs and the terrifying lows of opium addiction, making public what many experienced in private. This obsession also crossed cultural boundaries. Opium was a major commodity in trade with China, leading to the infamous Opium Wars, a brutal chapter in British imperial history. You would read about these conflicts in the newspapers, perhaps without fully grasping the devastating human cost of this powerful drug's global circulation, driven by economic interests and the voracious demand back home. As the century wore on, the understanding of addiction slowly began to change. Towards the end of the Victorian era, as medical science advanced and the consequences of widespread opioid use became undeniable, a moral panic began to set in. You would start to see advertisements for cures for the opium habit, often ironically containing opium themselves. The temperance movement initially focused on alcohol began to extend its moral condemnation to other drugs. The shift from a benign medicine to a stigmatized vice was gradual but profound, laying the groundwork for the modern understanding of drug abuse. So, as you rest tonight, consider this silent epidemic that swept through Victorian society. It wasn't a secret in the sense of being hidden, but rather an obsession normalized by lack of knowledge, driven by widespread suffering and sustained by an indifferent medical establishment. It reminds you of the profound differences in medical understanding and societal attitudes that separate your world from theirs, and how what is considered a destructive vice today was once a common, even comforting, part of daily life for countless Victorians. Segment 5, the unspoken language of sexuality and repression. Tonight, we delve into perhaps the most profound and hypocritical of Victorian obsessions. Sexuality itself, a force simultaneously denied, repressed, and yet intricately woven into the very fabric of their society. You're stepping into an era where public discourse on anything sexual was utterly forbidden, where even the legs of pianos were covered with modesty skirts, and where a woman's ankle was considered scandalous. Yet, beneath this glacial surface of prudery and moral rectitude, the currents of desire, societal expectations, and the brutal realities of human biology churned with immense power. Imagine yourself a Victorian woman. From childhood, you are groomed for a singular purpose: to be a chaste wife and a prolific mother. Your education, your entire upbringing, is geared towards domesticity and the cultivation of an almost ethereal purity. You are taught that you are a delicate creature, prone to nervousness and vapors, largely devoid of sexual desire. Indeed, doctors of the era often proclaimed that respectable women had no sexual urges whatsoever, or that such urges were a sign of moral degradation or illness. You would internalize this, believing that any stirrings within you were unnatural, shameful, a betrayal of your very womanhood. This pervasive belief created an unbearable psychological burden, forcing your true self into a cage of societal expectation. As a Victorian man, your experience was starkly different, yet equally burdened by societal hypocrisy. You were expected to be a pillar of morality, the head of your household, fiercely protective of your wife's and daughter's purity. Yet, concurrently, your natural male urges were acknowledged, even excused, as a necessary evil that could not and should not be entirely suppressed. The double standard was a cavernous chasm. Your sexual needs were implicitly understood to be legitimate, requiring an outlet that could not possibly be found with your pure, passionless wife. This societal endorsement fueled the very industries of prostitution and pornography we discussed, creating a secret world where male desire could be indulged without tarnishing the sanctity of the domestic sphere. The very language of sexuality was an unspoken one, a tapestry of euphemism and evasion. You wouldn't hear words like penis or vagina in polite conversation. Even legs might be referred to as limbs. Reproductive organs were simply private parts, shrouded in a conspiracy of silence. This lack of open communication fostered ignorance, fear, and a profound sense of shame surrounding anything sexual. Imagine growing up with absolutely no accurate information about your own body, about sex, about reproduction, leaving you vulnerable to misinformation, fear, and the profound shock of the marriage bed. Marriage itself was a complex institution, often driven by economic necessity and social status rather than romantic love. You might enter into a marriage with a partner you barely knew, propelled by family expectations or financial calculations. The wedding night, for many women, would be an awakening to a physical reality they were utterly unprepared for, possibly traumatic, certainly jarring. And for men, the pressure to perform, to consummate the marriage and produce heirs, was immense, all while navigating the unspoken rules of their pure wife's supposed lack of desire. The consequences of this repression were manifold and often devastating. Hysteria, a catch-all diagnosis for any female ailment from anxiety to fainting spells to sexual frustration, was rampant. Doctors often treated these conditions with highly invasive procedures, or by prescribing sedatives, or even, infamously, by manually inducing paroxysmal convulsions, orgasms, a practice that inadvertently birthed the vibrator. Imagine the indignity, the utter helplessness of being a woman whose very emotions and physical sensations were pathologized, categorized as illness rather than legitimate human experience. Beyond the domestic sphere, the obsession with purity and the suppression of sexuality fueled anxieties about deviance. Homosexuality, though not explicitly outlawed until later, was implicitly understood as an unspeakable vice. Figures like Oscar Wilde, whose trial became a national scandal, revealed the brutal consequences of transgressing these unspoken norms. You would read the lurid newspaper accounts, the public outrage, the swift downfall of a brilliant mind, and understand the terrible risks of being different in a society obsessed with conformity. The body itself became a battleground of modesty and control. Tight corsetry, a tortuous garment that reshaped the female form into an unnaturally slender silhouette, was not just fashion. It was a symbol of control, of containing the potentially unruly female body. You would feel the suffocating constriction around your ribs, the difficulty breathing, the pressure on your internal organs, all in the name of propriety and an idealized, fragile femininity. This was a physical manifestation of the mental and emotional straitjacket imposed upon women. Yet, despite all this repression, sexuality found its outlets, often in the very shadows where it was forced to reside. The flourishing of pornography and prostitution, as we've explored, was a direct consequence of this societal pressure cooker. But also, in more subtle ways, in art and literature, sexuality shimmered beneath the surface. Romantic poetry, with its passionate declarations and veiled allusions, hinted at depths of feeling that polite society denied. The subtle glances, the fleeting touches, the carefully curated garden walks of young lovers, all were infused with an unspoken eroticism, a subtext that every Victorian understood. This paradox of denial and obsession tells you something crucial about human nature. You can legislate morality, you can shame and repress, but you cannot extinguish fundamental human drives. Instead, they find alternative, often distorted, pathways to expression. The Victorian era, with its rigid external morality, was secretly consumed by the very urges it sought to deny. As you close your eyes tonight, reflect on the silent struggles of the Victorians with their own desires. It's a stark reminder that what is left unsaid, what is pushed beneath the surface,
often holds the most potent power, shaping lives, relationships,
and an entire society in ways that are both profound and tragic. Their unacknowledged obsession with sexuality wasn't just a private struggle. It was a defining force that sculpted the very landscape of their inner lives. Tonight, we plunge into the murky depths of Victorian society, a place where gaslight flickers on cobblestone streets, barely illuminating the shadows that conceal a pervasive and horrifying obsession. Crime. You might envision the era as one of strict law and order, a time when Sherlock Holmes brilliantly solved every riddle. But the reality for the Victorians was far grittier, a daily confrontation with violence, poverty-driven theft, and sensationalized murders that captivated the public imagination and fueled an almost insatiable appetite for the macabre. Imagine yourself as a resident of Victorian London. You walk past the grand, imposing architecture of Scotland Yard, the newly established Metropolitan Police Force, a visible, if not always effective, presence. Yet despite their growing numbers, crime was an inescapable part of daily life. The grinding poverty of the burgeoning cities, the vast social inequalities, and the sheer anonymity of urban existence created a fertile breeding ground for theft, robbery, and desperate acts of violence. You'd hear the whispered tales of pickpockets lurking in crowded markets, of highwaymen still preying on lonely roads, and of brutal street gangs asserting their territory with impunity. The sensation of fear was palpable, a constant companion, particularly for women and those venturing out after dark. You'd clutch your purse tighter, quicken your pace past dimly lit alleyways, and perhaps cast a nervous glance over your shoulder, knowing that danger could lurk in any shadow. The newspapers, with their vivid, often hyperbolic accounts of criminal exploits, only served to amplify this fear, turning every act of villainy into a chilling bedtime story for the masses. But it was murder that truly gripped the Victorian imagination. The infamous Jack the Ripper case, which terrorized London's Whitechapel district in 1888, wasn't an anomaly in its public fascination. It was the zenith of a long-standing obsession with the ultimate transgression. You would devour every detail reported in the penny dreadfuls and daily papers, the gruesome descriptions of the victims, the fruitless police investigations, the tantalizing clues, the wild speculation about the killer's identity. The fear and horror were real, but so was an undeniable, almost prurient fascination with the sheer brutality and mystery of it all. It was a macabre puzzle, a real-life horror story unfolding on the pages of your morning paper. The crime itself was often brutal. Without modern forensic science, without CCTV, without swift communication, many crimes went unsolved. You'd read about bodies found in rivers, about domestic disputes escalating into horrific violence, about children disappearing into the vast, indifferent city. The lack of resolution, the lingering questions, only intensified the public's morbid curiosity. It was a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the inherent evil that they believed lurked in the darkest corners of human nature. This obsession wasn't just about the criminals. It was equally about the nascent science of detection. You would follow with intense interest the development of new methods of policing. The establishment of the detective force, a relatively new concept, offered a glimmer of hope that the perpetrators of these heinous acts could be brought to justice. Sherlock Holmes, though fictional, perfectly captured the public's yearning for a rational, almost magical solution to seemingly impossible crimes. You would marvel at his powers of deduction, his scientific approach to observation, his ability to piece together fragments of evidence to reveal the truth. He was the idealized embodiment of what they desperately wanted their police force to be. The real-life detectives, too, were figures of immense public interest. You'd read about their struggles, their triumphs, and their frustrations in tracking down villains. The emerging techniques of fingerprinting, forensic toxicology, and psychological profiling were slowly beginning to transform the art of detection into a science, offering new tools in the relentless battle against crime. This new frontier of forensic investigation captivated the Victorian mind, promising a future where no crime would go unpunished. The obsession extended to the trials themselves. Public executions, though declining by the end of the century, still drew massive crowds, a chilling spectacle of justice served. You might join the throngs outside Newgate Prison, eager to witness a public hanging, a perverse combination of moral condemnation and sensational entertainment. The solemn tolling of the bell, the hushed anticipation, the gasp of the crowd as the trapdoor sprung. It was a primal, visceral experience, a stark reminder of the ultimate consequence of transgression. And, for those not executed, the penal system itself was a source of public fascination. You'd read about the grim realities of prison life, the harsh discipline, the silence, the hard labor, all designed to reform criminals. The construction of new, imposing prisons like Pentonville, with its panopticon-inspired design, reflected the era's belief in surveillance and rigid control as tools of rehabilitation. Yet, for many, prisons were merely breeding grounds for more crime, perpetuating a cycle of poverty and desperation. The criminal underworld itself became a subject of intense fascination. You'd hear tales of Fagin-like characters running schools for pickpockets, of elaborate heists, and of the secret slang and codes used by criminals to communicate. This glimpse into an inverted society with its own rules and hierarchies was both terrifying and titillating. It offered a thrilling contrast to the ordered, respectable world that the Victorians strove to maintain. So, as you rest tonight, consider the Victorian obsession with crime and detection. It wasn't just a grim reality. It was a societal mirror reflecting their deepest anxieties about poverty, morality, and the inherent darkness within humanity. It fueled their fears, captivated their imaginations, and propelled the development of modern policing and forensic science. It reminds you that even in an age of strict public morality, the allure of the forbidden, the mystery of the monstrous, and the quest for justice held an irresistible, often terrifying, grip on the human mind. Tonight, we journey into the heart of Victorian terror, an omnipresent fear that shaped their very existence: disease. You, in your modern world of antibiotics, vaccinations, and public health campaigns, can scarcely imagine the constant, insidious threat that lurked in the very air, water, and soil of a Victorian city. This wasn't a secret obsession in the sense of being hidden, but rather a profoundly visceral, deeply feared reality that spawned a desperate, often morbid, fascination with the causes and cures of illness, propelling a monumental, if slow, transformation in sanitation. Imagine yourself in the bustling, overcrowded streets of mid-19th century London. The air is thick with the acrid smell of coal smoke, mixed with the stench of human and animal waste. The Thames, the city's main artery, is also its main sewer, a fetid, bubbling river of filth. You would see children playing in gutters that literally ran with sewage, their clothes caked with grime. You'd encounter the ragged night soil men emptying cesspools, their wagons leaving a trail of unimaginable odors. This wasn't just unpleasant. It was lethal. The fear of cholera, that swift and agonizing killer, was a profound collective trauma. You would wake up to hear news of another outbreak, a terrifying whisper that could quickly turn into a roar, sweeping through your neighborhood, claiming entire families in a matter of days. The symptoms: violent vomiting, severe diarrhea, agonizing cramps, rapid dehydration, were horrific to witness and even more horrific to experience. You'd watch helplessly as a loved one succumbed, their eyes sunken, their skin turning blue, their life draining away before your very eyes. The lack of understanding about its cause only intensified the panic. Many believed it was transmitted by miasma, bad air, a concept that made every foul odor a harbinger of death. Tuberculosis, or consumption as it was commonly known, was an even more pervasive and drawn-out torment. You might call it the romantic disease of the era, inspiring delicate heroines in literature, but in reality, it was a brutal, slow death sentence. You would witness loved ones wasting away, their bodies growing thinner, their coughs increasingly racking, their lungs slowly consumed. The terror lay in its inevitability, its slow but certain progression, often affecting entire families. The Victorian obsession with thinness and fragility in women inadvertently reflected the physical symptoms of this widespread killer, making illness almost fashionable in a perverse twist. Child mortality rates were truly staggering. It was not uncommon for a family to lose several children before they reached adulthood. You would experience the profound grief of losing an infant to infant mortality, a euphemism for a myriad of diseases like measles, scarlet fever, or diphtheria, all of which often proved fatal. The casual presence of death in childhood, while normalized by its frequency, didn't diminish the private anguish.
Every new cough, every flushed cheek, every slight fever in a child would send a jolt of terror through your heart,
knowing how easily they could be snatched away. This constant threat of disease fostered an intense, almost morbid curiosity about the human body, its vulnerabilities and its ailments. You would devour books and pamphlets on health, sometimes filled with genuine advice, often with quack remedies. Doctors, though slowly advancing in their understanding, still operated largely on theories of humours and bad blood, bleeding and purging patients in ways that often worsened their conditions. You'd endure agonizing procedures without anaesthetic, trusting implicitly in the man of science, even as his methods seemed barbaric. The quest for sanitation, therefore, became a monumental, almost heroic endeavour, driven by the sheer terror of disease. You would witness the slow, arduous process of transforming cities. The construction of vast sewage systems like London's revolutionary network engineered by Joseph Bazalgette was an undertaking of epic proportions. Imagine the disruption, the noise, the sheer scale of digging miles of tunnels beneath a sprawling metropolis, all to channel away the waste that had for so long been a source of pestilence. This wasn't just civic engineering, it was a war against an invisible enemy. The work of pioneering public health reformers like Edwin Chadwick, who advocated for improved drainage, clean water, and better housing, slowly began to shift public perception. You'd read their reports, perhaps initially scoffing at the idea that filth directly caused disease, clinging to the miasma theory. But, as evidence mounted, particularly after Dr. John Snow famously linked cholera outbreaks to contaminated water pumps, the tide began to turn. The idea that disease was preventable, that human agency could combat these invisible killers, was a revolutionary concept. The focus on personal hygiene, too, began to grow. You'd see advice columns urging regular bathing, a luxury for many, fresh air and clean clothing. While still far from modern standards, this marked a significant departure from earlier centuries, where bathing was often viewed with suspicion. The introduction of affordable soap, the widespread use of carbolic acid as a disinfectant, promoted by figures like Joseph Lister for surgical hygiene, and the gradual improvement of living conditions slowly but surely began to chip away at the empire of disease. This transformation was not smooth. There was resistance from those who profited from slum housing, from those who distrusted government intervention, and from those who simply couldn't afford the changes. You would hear arguments against the expense, the inconvenience, and the intrusion into private lives. But the sheer scale of human suffering, the constant threat of epidemic, ultimately drove the change. So, as you reflect on this tonight, consider the profound impact of disease on the Victorian mind. It was an obsession born of fear, a relentless pressure that forced them to confront the grim realities of their environment and their own bodies. But out of this terror emerged a powerful drive for reform, laying the foundations for modern public health and transforming the very fabric of urban life. It reminds you that some of the greatest progress in human history is born not from abstract ideals, but from the desperate, visceral need to survive and protect what is most precious. Tonight, let's unlock a hidden door into the Victorian soul, a private world overflowing with exotic artifacts, natural wonders, and the peculiar thrill of accumulation. We're exploring the pervasive and often eccentric obsession with collecting, from natural history specimens and ethnographic treasures to a bewildering array of everyday objects. You, living in a minimalist, decluttered age, might struggle to grasp the sheer, unbridled passion for acquiring and displaying that characterized this era. A passion that spilled out of private homes and into the grand halls of public museums. Imagine yourself as a gentleman of means in the mid-19th century. Your study isn't just a place for books. It's a universe in miniature, a veritable cabinet of curiosities, or Wunderkammer, as its Renaissance predecessors were called. On shelves lining every wall under glass domes and in meticulously labeled drawers, you'd find a bewildering assortment of treasures. Perhaps a fossilized fern from a distant coal mine, its delicate imprint a whisper from prehistoric times. Beside it, a shimmering array of butterflies pinned with scientific precision, their wings iridescent against the cork backing. Nearby, a taxidermied bird of paradise, its vibrant plumage a splash of tropical color in the gloom of a London winter. The drive to collect was multifaceted. For some, it was a scientific pursuit, a desire to categorize, understand, and document the natural world. The explosion of new discoveries from expeditions to Africa, Asia, and the Americas brought a flood of exotic specimens back to Britain. You'd read thrilling accounts of intrepid explorers discovering new species of plants, insects, and animals, fueling a patriotic and scientific fervor to acquire these novelties. Every new acquisition was a small victory for imperial exploration and the march of knowledge. For others, it was about status and display. A well-curated collection was a testament to one's wealth, education, and discerning taste. You might showcase a meticulously organized array of seashells, each one polished to a lustrous sheen, perhaps brought back from a grand tour of the Mediterranean. Or a collection of ancient Roman coins, their worn faces whispering tales of emperors and empires long past. The act of collecting itself was a performance, a way to demonstrate one's position in a rapidly stratified society. You'd invite guests to admire your acquisitions, subtly reinforcing your own standing. The sheer variety of objects collected was astounding. You weren't limited to fossils or butterflies. You might collect stamps, philately became a huge craze, coins, antique weaponry, geological samples, ethnographic artifacts from newly colonized lands, often acquired with dubious legality, human skulls for phrenological study, scientific instruments, porcelain figurines, snuff boxes, dolls, or even peculiar items from freak shows. The weirder, the more unique, the more foreign, the better. Imagine the thrill of discovering a truly unique specimen, a rare butterfly or an unusual mineral, knowing you were one of the few to possess it. The Victorians were also obsessed with the act of preservation, particularly through taxidermy. Imagine a glass case in your drawing room, not just with a stuffed badger, but with a bizarre diorama of anthropomorphic squirrels playing cards, or kittens dressed in human clothes engaged in a tiny tea party. This was the era of fancy taxidermy, a bizarre intersection of science, art, and macabre humor. You might find it unsettling today, but for them, it was a way to bring nature indoors, to immortalize beloved pets, and to create conversation pieces that blended the natural with the fantastic. This private mania for collecting eventually spilled into the public sphere, giving rise to the great Victorian museums. You would spend a day at the British Museum, or the Natural History Museum, or the Victoria and Albert Museum, marveling at the vast collections amassed from across the globe. These institutions, built on the foundations of private collections, served to educate, enlighten, and instill national pride. You'd wander through halls filled with Egyptian mummies, Greek sculptures, dinosaur skeletons, and intricate displays of flora and fauna, feeling a profound sense of awe at the sheer breadth of human knowledge and the wonders of the natural world. The act of acquiring these objects often involved imperial expansion and exploitation. Many ethnographic artifacts, for example, were taken from colonized peoples without their consent, now displayed in glass cases as trophies of empire. You, as a Victorian, would likely view these as symbols of civilization's triumph, a testament to British dominance, without questioning the ethics of their acquisition. The collecting impulse was deeply intertwined with the prevailing ideologies of the era. This obsession also had a distinctly domestic flavor. Women, confined to the domestic sphere, often channeled their collecting instincts into more appropriate hobbies, like collecting pressed flowers, scrapbooking, or assembling intricate shell grottos. Imagine a young woman meticulously arranging dried ferns and flowers in a leather-bound album, each leaf a memory, each petal a silent story. This was their way of creating order, beauty, and a personal narrative within the confines of their homes. The very act of collecting, of imposing order on a chaotic world, was deeply comforting in an era of rapid industrial change and social upheaval. For you, everything is easily accessible online. For them, each item represented a journey, a discovery, a tangible connection to a wider world that was slowly being mapped and understood. It was a way to make sense of the universe, one specimen at a time. So, as you drift off tonight, consider the Victorian obsession with collecting. It was more than just a hobby. It was a profound psychological drive, a cultural phenomenon that reflected their scientific curiosity, their social aspirations, their imperial ambitions, and their deep-seated need to categorize and understand the world around them. It reminds you that the objects we surround ourselves with are not just things, they are reflections of our deepest desires and obsessions, connecting us to stories far older than ourselves. Tonight, let's step into the breathtaking, often disorienting world of Victorian technological obsession. You, with your smartphone in your hand and instant global communication at your fingertips, might struggle to truly grasp the sheer, mind-bending awe that new inventions sparked in the Victorian imagination. For them, technology wasn't just practical advancement. It was a form of magic, a tangible manifestation of human ingenuity that reshaped their world at an astonishing, often terrifying pace. Imagine yourself standing on a railway platform in the 1840s. A colossal black locomotive, a beast of iron and steam, hisses and groans before you, belching smoke and sparks. The ground trembles beneath your feet as it begins to move, gathering speed with an unstoppable force. Before this, travel was by horse, by carriage, slow and arduous. Now you could traverse vast distances in hours, not days. The very concept of time and space was collapsing. You'd feel the rush of wind, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels, the exhilarating sense of speed. This wasn't just transportation. It was a revolution, a literal forging of a new world, a marvel that reshaped industries, cities, and human perception. The steam engine, in its myriad applications, was the pulsating heart of this technological wonder. You'd see it powering factories, ships, printing presses, transforming production, commerce, and daily life. The roar of industry, the ceaseless clatter of machinery, became the soundtrack of the age. For you, the sounds of industrial might be nostalgic, but for them, it was the sound of progress, of wealth being generated, of a nation forging its destiny. Then came photography. Imagine seeing a captured image, a perfect, detailed likeness of a person or a scene for the very first time. Before this, only painting or drawing could achieve such a feat, and only for the wealthy.
Now a moment in time could be frozen, replicated, shared.
You'd feel the almost supernatural power of it, a permanent record of fleeting existence. The daguerreotype, the carte de visite, the album and print. Each new development in photography was greeted with wonder. It wasn't just a tool. It was an artistic medium, a scientific instrument, and a cultural phenomenon that transformed how Victorians saw themselves and their world, allowing them to capture loved ones, exotic landscapes, and even the solemn faces of the dead, as we've discussed. And electricity. Think of the wonder of seeing artificial light banish the darkness with a flip of a switch. You would have grown up with gaslight, with candles, with the constant threat of fire. Now, arc lamps illuminated city streets with a startling brilliance, and eventually, electric incandescent bulbs began to replace gas in homes and businesses. The ability to harness this invisible force, to make it power machines, light homes, and eventually transmit information, felt like pure sorcery. You'd marvel at the spectacle of electrical exhibitions, the crackle of static, the glow of new inventions, feeling like you were witnessing the dawn of a new,
Magical age, the telegraph, for instance.
offered instantaneous communication across vast distances. Before, a message might take weeks to cross the Atlantic by ship. Now, thanks to an intricate web of undersea cables, news could travel in minutes. Imagine the sheer disbelief, the profound impact of receiving news from across the globe almost instantly. You'd read about the laying of the transatlantic cable, a Herculean engineering feat, and feel a surge of national pride and technological triumph. It literally shrank the world, transforming diplomacy, commerce, and human connection. You might visit the Great Exhibition of 1851 at the Crystal Palace, a monumental glass and iron structure itself a marvel of engineering. Inside, you'd be overwhelmed by the sheer display of human ingenuity, new machinery, exotic goods, scientific instruments, all celebrating the triumphs of the Industrial Revolution. You'd walk among thousands of exhibits, feeling a profound sense of awe and optimism, a belief that technology held the key to an endlessly prosperous future. It was a temple to progress, and you were a devoted worshipper. This technological obsession wasn't just about grand inventions. It permeated everyday life. You'd find new domestic appliances like improved sewing machines that liberated women from endless hours of hand-stitching, or new gas stoves that revolutionized cooking. The bicycle, in its various forms, offered unprecedented freedom of movement, particularly for women, challenging traditional notions of female propriety and encouraging greater independence. You'd feel the wind in your hair, the thrill of self-propulsion, the liberating sense of moving under your own power. Of course, this rapid progress wasn't without its anxieties. The speed of change was disorienting for some. The roar of machinery, the pollution from factories, the relentless march of progress, all had their darker side. You might read about Luddite-like reactions, about fears that machines would replace human labor, about the dehumanizing aspects of industrialization. Yet, the overwhelming sentiment was one of optimism, a belief that every problem could eventually be solved by human ingenuity and technological prowess. So, as you prepare to sleep, consider the profound impact of technology on the Victorian mind. It was an obsession born of curiosity, ambition, and a boundless belief in human potential. It transformed their landscapes, their industries, their daily routines, and their very perception of time and space. It reminds you that innovation, even when it feels like magic, is often born of hard work, relentless experimentation, and an unshakable faith in the power of invention to reshape the world. For the Victorians, every new invention was a miracle, a testament to a new kind of magic that defined their modern age. Tonight, let's embark on a journey across oceans and continents, into the very heart of the Victorian psyche, to uncover an obsession as vast and powerful as their global reach, the British Empire and the exotic other. You, living in a post-colonial world, might view empire through a lens of critique and historical reckoning. But for the Victorians, the empire was a source of immense pride, a moral crusade, and a wellspring of endless fascination with the distant, the mysterious, and the profoundly different. Imagine yourself in a grand London drawing room. On the walls hang maps of the world, vast swathes of it coloured in a triumphant shade of red, signifying British dominion. Your daily newspaper carries headlines of new territories acquired, rebellions quelled, and intrepid explorers pushing into uncharted lands. The air is thick with tales of adventure, of brave soldiers battling savage tribes, of noble missionaries bringing Christianity to the heathen, and of courageous administrators bringing civilization to the farthest corners of the earth. You'd feel a swelling of patriotic pride, a sense of belonging to the greatest empire the world had ever known, a divine mandate to rule. This wasn't just abstract geopolitics, it was deeply personal. The empire brought a constant stream of exotic goods and ideas into your daily life. You'd sip tea from India, savor spices from Ceylon, wear cotton from Egypt, and admire silks from China. These commodities, once rare and expensive, were becoming increasingly common, weaving the empire into the very fabric of your domestic existence. You would feel a tangible connection to these distant lands through the everyday objects around you. The fascination with the exotic other was both profound and problematic. You'd flock to exhibitions showcasing natives from various colonies, displayed in recreated villages or performing traditional dances. These human zoos, now rightly condemned as dehumanizing spectacles, were wildly popular. You would gaze with a mixture of curiosity, fascination, and perhaps a subtle sense of superiority at people whose cultures, appearances, and customs were so utterly different from your own. This was seen as education, a chance to witness the uncivilized and implicitly confirm the superiority of British culture. Literature, too, fueled this obsession. You'd devour adventure novels set in the jungles of India or the deserts of Africa, filled with daring heroes, dangerous animals, and mysterious rituals. Rudyard Kipling's stories, for instance, created vivid, often romanticized portrayals of colonial life, shaping your understanding of imperial duty and the perceived burden of bringing order to chaotic lands. You'd follow the exploits of explorers like David Livingstone and Henry Morton Stanley with bated breath, their journeys into the heart of Africa becoming epic sagas of courage and discovery. The natural world of the empire captivated the Victorians. Botanical gardens were filled with exotic plants brought back from every corner of the globe, their vibrant colors and strange forms a testament to the diversity of creation. Zoological gardens showcased lions from Africa, tigers from India, and kangaroos from Australia, allowing you to gaze upon creatures previously known only through drawings. The science of natural history, bolstered by imperial expansion, flourished, as countless new species were discovered, classified, and brought back for study and display. This obsession with the exotic extended to collecting. We spoke of cabinets of curiosities, and many of these were filled with artifacts from distant lands, carved idols, intricate textiles, strange weapons. You might possess a shrunken head from the Amazon, a piece of ancient Egyptian pottery, or an elaborately woven basket from the South Pacific. These objects weren't just decorative, they were tangible links to far-off cultures, trophies of conquest, and conversation starters that allowed you to display your worldliness and your connection to the vastness of the empire. Of course, this fascination was deeply intertwined with racial hierarchies. The Victorians believed in the superiority of the white race, particularly the Anglo-Saxon, a belief used to justify the brutal realities of colonialism. You would be taught about the civilizing mission, the idea that Britain had a moral obligation to bring progress, Christianity, and its own form of governance to what they considered backward peoples. This paternalistic worldview, though seemingly benevolent, underpinned widespread exploitation, violence, and the suppression of indigenous cultures. The darker side of empire was often conveniently ignored or rationalized. The famines in India, the exploitation of labor, the violent suppression of rebellions, the vast wealth extracted from conquered lands. These were distant realities, often sanitized or presented as necessary evils for the greater good. You, as a loyal subject, might hear whispers of atrocities, but the official narrative, reinforced by media and education, was one of benevolent rule and civilizing progress. Even architecture reflected this imperial ambition. Grand public buildings, particularly in London, often incorporated elements from various colonized cultures, a subtle nod to the global reach of British power. The Crystal Palace itself, a marvel of Victorian engineering, housed exhibits from every corner of the empire, a microcosm of the world under British sway. So as you drift towards sleep, consider the Victorian obsession with empire and the exotic other. It was a complex, contradictory passion, born of pride, curiosity, scientific ambition, and a deeply ingrained sense of racial superiority. It brought both enlightenment and exploitation, cultural exchange, and profound destruction. It reminds you that the way a society sees the world beyond its borders reveals as much about its own inner workings as it does about the lands it seeks to dominate, leaving a lasting legacy that continues to shape your world today. Tonight, we delve into one of the most unsettling and poignant Victorian obsessions, the human mind itself, particularly when it strayed from the narrow confines of what was considered sane. You are entering a world grappling with mental illness, not with your modern understanding of neuroscience and psychology, but through a lens of fear, moral judgment, and a burgeoning, often brutal institutionalization. The asylum, for the Victorians, was both a place of terror and a supposed sanctuary, a silent monument to society's struggle with the unseen torments of the mind. Imagine yourself in a bustling Victorian city. You walk past elegant homes, but you also see the grim realities of poverty, the stress of industrial life, the constant pressure to conform. Mental illness, or lunacy as it was often termed, was not understood as a medical condition in the way you comprehend it. Instead, it was often attributed to moral failing, sudden shock, hereditary taint, or even demonic possession. You would hear hushed whispers about madness in the family, a stain upon one's lineage, a terrifying secret to be concealed at all costs. The fear of madness was profound. To be declared insane was to lose not just your freedom, but your very identity, your agency, your place in society. For women especially, the boundaries of sanity were perilously narrow. Any deviation from expected feminine behavior, assertiveness, melancholy, sexual expression, even intellectual ambition, could be pathologized. You might be diagnosed with hysteria, a catch-all term for female distress, and face the threat of institutionalization, often against your will, by a husband or father. The very vulnerability of women to such diagnoses fueled a deep, unspoken anxiety. The early asylums were often terrifying places, vestiges of older madhouses, notorious for their cruelty and neglect. You'd hear chilling tales of patients chained, beaten, and left in squalor. Bedlam, the infamous Bethlehem Royal Hospital, was for centuries a public spectacle where you could pay a penny to gawk at the lunatics for entertainment. Imagine the dehumanization, the utter despair of being reduced to an object of public curiosity, stripped of all dignity. As the Victorian era progressed, a reform movement slowly gained momentum, advocating for more humane treatment, what was called moral treatment. This involved kindness, useful occupation, and a structured environment,
rather than physical restraint.
New asylums, often grand, imposing structures, were built in the countryside, away from the chaos of the city. You might see their formidable walls from a distance, or read about their progressive ideals in newspapers. These institutions, like Broadmoor for the criminally insane or Hanwell Asylum, aim to offer a more therapeutic environment, a place where the alienated could be restored to reason. However, even in these reformed asylums, conditions were often bleak, and genuine treatment remained elusive. You would experience the profound boredom, the rigid routines, the loss of personal liberty. Patients were often subjected to bizarre and ineffective cures, from water immersion therapies to the perpetual motion chair, all designed to shock the patient back to sanity. Imagine the confusion, the fear, the utter hopelessness of undergoing such procedures, your voice unheard, your suffering misunderstood. The very architecture of the asylum reflected society's attempts to control and contain madness. The high walls, the barred windows, the labyrinthine corridors, all were designed to keep the insane separated from the sane, to protect society from what was deemed unpredictable and dangerous. You would feel the oppressive weight of these walls, the sense of being utterly cut off from the world you once knew, your individuality slowly eroded by institutionalization. The public fascination with madness extended to the macabre. You'd read lurid accounts of lunatics escaping, of sensational crimes committed by the insane, fueling fears and stereotypes. Figures like Jack the Ripper, whose identity was often speculated to be a madman, played into these anxieties. The popular press often sensationalized stories of asylum life, painting grim pictures that both terrified and titillated readers. You would devour these stories, simultaneously fearing madness and being drawn to its mysterious, unsettling nature. This obsession also spurred a burgeoning field of alienism, the precursor to modern psychiatry. Doctors, or alienists, began to categorize and study various forms of mental illness, slowly moving away from purely moral explanations towards a more medical understanding, albeit often flawed. You might encounter theories of inherited taints, of brain lesions, or of environmental factors contributing to madness. This scientific curiosity, however rudimentary, represented a crucial step towards understanding the complexities
Of the human mind, the Victorians were also
profoundly interested in the phenomenon of moral insanity, individuals who seemed rational but lacked a moral compass, engaging in compulsive and destructive behaviors. This blurred the lines between madness and criminality, raising profound questions about free will, responsibility, and the very nature of human evil. You debate these issues in intellectual circles, grappling with the unsettling notion that a seemingly normal person could harbour such darkness within. So, as you prepare to sleep tonight, consider the Victorian obsession with madness and the asylum walls. It was a complex and often contradictory struggle, born of fear, ignorance, and a desperate desire to understand and control the unruly aspects of the human mind. It reminds you of the profound human cost of misunderstanding mental illness and how far your own society has come in its efforts to treat and destigmatize those who suffer from it. The silent suffering behind those Victorian asylum walls is a poignant reminder of the fragility of the mind and the enduring quest for human understanding. Tonight, we step into the vibrant, often unsettling, world of Victorian public entertainment, an obsession that ranged from the genteel pleasure of the music hall to the thrilling,
often disturbing spectacle of the freak show. You,
with your streaming services and virtual realities, might find it hard to comprehend the hunger for live spectacle, the shared, visceral experience that captivated masses and reflected the darker curiosities of the age. For the Victorians, entertainment was not just diversion. It was a mirror to their social anxieties, their imperial ambitions, and their fascination with the extraordinary and the grotesque. Imagine yourself strolling through the bustling streets of a Victorian city on a Saturday night. The air hums with anticipation. You could choose a respectable outing to a pantomime with its elaborate sets and family-friendly humour, or perhaps a more risque evening at a music hall where lively songs, comedic skits, and daring acrobatic acts offered a fleeting escape from the grind of daily life. You'd feel the roar of the crowd, the smell of sawdust and cheap beer, the collective joy of shared laughter and applause. This was democratic entertainment, accessible to all classes, a vibrant tapestry of popular culture unfolding before your eyes. But beneath this veneer of polite amusement lay a darker, more compelling obsession, the allure of the freak show or cabinet of curiosities of the living. You'd find these spectacles at fairgrounds, travelling circuses, and even permanent exhibitions in major cities. They promised a glimpse into the truly extraordinary, individuals whose bodies defied conventional norms, giants, midgets, bearded ladies, conjoined twins, people with unusual deformities or those with unique skin conditions. You would join the throng pushing forward, driven by a powerful mixture of morbid curiosity, fascination, and perhaps a flicker of unease. The famous P.T. Barnum, master showman of the era, epitomized this exploitation and fascination. He brought figures like General Tom Thumb, a little person who gained international fame, and Joyce Heth, an enslaved African-American woman whom Barnum claimed was George, Washington's 161-year-old nurse, to stages around the world. You'd pay your shilling, enter the tent, and gaze upon these individuals, often presented with exaggerated, sensationalized backstories. The atmosphere would be a complex mix of wonder, pity, and the uncomfortable thrill of witnessing what was considered unnatural or monstrous. For the Victorians, these human oddities were not just entertainment. They were objects of scientific curiosity, theological debate, and even moral instruction. You might hear learned discussions about the causes of their conditions or philosophical debates about their place in God's creation. They served as a living demonstration of the vast, sometimes unsettling, diversity of the human form, challenging conventional notions of beauty and normalcy. Yet, the price of this public spectacle was often immense for the performers, who were frequently exploited, dehumanized, and forced to live their lives on display. This obsession also reflected Victorian anxieties about the human body and its imperfections. In a society striving for physical perfection and moral rectitude, the freak served as a stark, often terrifying reminder of deviation from the norm. You might feel a perverse sense of comfort in witnessing someone worse off than yourself, or a chilling fear that such an anomaly could befall anyone. It was a way to confront the frightening possibilities of physical difference in a controlled public setting. The dark carnival extended beyond human oddities. You'd find mesmerists and hypnotists performing astounding feats of mind control, seances promising contact with the dead, and conjurers performing illusions that seemed to defy the laws of nature. These acts tapped into the Victorian fascination with the supernatural, the mysterious, and the power of the human mind, blurring the lines between science, magic, and outright trickery. You would feel a sense of wonder and bewilderment, struggling to separate genuine phenomena from ingenious deception. Alongside these sensational spectacles, there was also a profound fascination with danger and daring. Tightrope walkers, lion tamers, and daring escape artists captivated audiences with their death-defying acts. You would hold your breath as a performer balanced precariously high above the crowd, or as a wild animal lunged at its tamer. The thrill of witnessing such bravery, such risk, offered a powerful antidote to the often monotonous realities of everyday life. It was a vicarious experience of courage and adrenaline. The growth of photography also played a crucial role in documenting and disseminating these spectacles. You could purchase carte de visite of famous freaks, miniature portraits that allowed you to take home a piece of the show to possess a visual record of the extraordinary. These images, often mass-produced, further normalized and spread the fascination, allowing those who couldn't attend a show to still participate in the obsession. This pervasive hunger for public spectacle tells you much about the Victorian condition. It was an era of profound social and technological change, and entertainment offered both escape and a means of grappling with these transformations. It was a space where societal norms could be both reinforced and subtly challenged, where the familiar met the bizarre, and where shared experiences forged a sense of community, even if sometimes through the uncomfortable gaze at the other. So, as you close your eyes tonight, consider the Victorian obsession with public entertainment, from the joyous clamour of the music hall to the unsettling allure of the freak show. It reminds you that human beings have always sought stories, spectacles, and shared experiences to make sense of their world, to confront their fears, and to revel in the extraordinary. The Victorian Carnival, in all its forms, was a potent reflection of their deepest desires, their secret curiosities, and their enduring fascination with the limits of the human condition. Tonight, we slip into the rigid, unspoken rules of Victorian society, a world utterly consumed by social status and the relentless, often deceptive, art of appearance. You, living in a relatively fluid social landscape, might find it almost suffocating to comprehend the tyranny of class and reputation that governed every interaction, every choice, every aspect of a Victorian's life. This wasn't a secret obsession in the sense of being hidden, but rather an open, pervasive force that shaped their very identity, demanding a constant, elaborate performance of respectability and belonging. Imagine yourself a Victorian lady, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of polite society. Your worth isn't solely determined by your character or intellect, but by your family's lineage, your husband's profession, the size of your dowry, and perhaps most crucially, your ability to maintain an impeccable social facade. Every detail of your life, from the cut of your gown to the hours you kept, from the acquaintances you cultivated to the language you used, was a carefully calibrated signal of your position on the societal ladder. You would feel the immense pressure to conform, to present a perfect image, knowing that a single misstep could lead to social ruin. The Victorians lived in a highly stratified society with distinct classes: the aristocracy, the upper middle class, the burgeoning middle class, and the vast, often unseen working class. While there was some upward mobility due to industrial wealth, the lines between these groups were rigidly drawn, and crossing them was often fraught with peril. You would understand instinctively the subtle cues that delineated these classes: the tone of voice, the manner of dress, the leisure activities, the very way one held a teacup. This was a complex, unspoken language that dictated who you could associate with, where you could live, and what opportunities were available to you. The obsession with appearance was paramount. Your clothing wasn't just fashion, it was a uniform of status. If you were a gentleman, your perfectly tailored suit, your polished boots, your spotless top hat, all conveyed your respectability and success. For a lady, the elaborate layers of her gown, the quality of the fabric, the intricacy of her lace, the precision of her corsetry, all spoke volumes about her husband's wealth and her own position. You would spend hours getting dressed or supervising your maid, ensuring every detail was flawless, because your appearance was your public declaration of worth. Maintaining appearances extended beyond personal attire to your home. Your house wasn't just a dwelling, it was a stage for your social performance. The furniture, the ornaments, the artwork, the carefully arranged drawing room, all were meticulously chosen to reflect your taste and financial standing. You would ensure that your parlour, the public face of your home, was immaculately presented, ready to impress callers and solidify your social standing. The very cleanliness of your doorstep could be a testament to your domestic virtue. The rituals of social interaction were equally demanding. You would engage in elaborate calling rituals, leaving your card at the homes of acquaintances, waiting for a reciprocal visit. Dining etiquette was a complex dance of forks and spoons, place settings and polite conversation. The nuances of proper introductions, the art of small talk, the precise timing of every social interaction, all were rigorously observed. You would feel the constant mental exertion of navigating these unwritten rules, knowing that any breach could be interpreted as a sign of vulgarity or poor breeding. This obsession also led to a profound hypocrisy. Many Victorians lived double lives, projecting an image of unimpeachable morality and respectability while indulging in secret vices, as we've explored. The pressure to maintain appearances was so intense that it often drove individuals to extreme lengths of deception. You might know of a neighbour who seemed perfectly respectable, yet harboured a dark secret, constantly terrified of exposure that would shatter their carefully constructed facade. The rise of the nouveau riche, industrialists and merchants who acquired wealth but lacked aristocratic lineage, created new social anxieties. While they had money, they often struggled to gain acceptance into the older, established social circles. You'd witness their attempts to emulate aristocratic manners, their grander homes, their more lavish entertainments, sometimes with a touch of desperation. This tension between old money and new money fueled countless social dramas, playing out in drawing rooms and ballrooms across the land. For the working classes, the struggle for appearance was different but equally vital. Even in poverty, there was a fierce pride in respectability. You might scrimp and save to ensure your children had clean clothes for church, or to keep your small tenement room tidy, knowing that cleanliness and order were the last bastions of dignity in a harsh world. The fear of being seen as dirty or idle was profound, a constant battle against the crushing realities of their lives. This relentless focus on social status and appearance often stifled genuine emotion and individual expression. You would learn to mask your true feelings, to present a composed and proper demeanor, even in times of great distress. Spontaneity was often viewed with suspicion, and outward displays of passion or eccentricity were often condemned. The pressure to conform was immense, shaping not just how you acted, but how you perceived yourself. So as you drift off tonight, consider the Victorian obsession with social status, and the art of appearance. It was a profound cultural force, a silent dictator that governed their lives, shaping their homes, their clothing, their interactions, and their very identities. It reminds you of the enduring human desire for belonging and recognition, and the often stifling price that societies demand for acceptance, leaving a legacy of both rigid hierarchy and the subtle, often deceptive power of presentation. Tonight, we stumble into the flickering gaslight of the Victorian era's fervent, often credulous, obsession with medical quackery and pseudo-science.
You living in a world of evidence-based medicine and rigorous scientific review
Might find it astonishing how easily the Victorians fell prey to charlatans, miracle cures, and outlandish theories, driven by genuine suffering, a lack of scientific understanding, and a boundless optimism in the power of progress. This wasn't a secret in the sense of being hidden, but an open, pervasive market for false hope, a testament to humanity's enduring vulnerability to promises of quick fixes. Imagine yourself in a bustling Victorian market square. A flamboyant individual, dressed in a top hat and tails, stands upon a makeshift stage, bellowing promises to a captivated crowd. He's selling Dr. Solomon's Balm of Gilead or Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup, a patent medicine guaranteed to cure everything from consumption to gout, from female complaints to nervous debility. You'd listen, perhaps skeptically but with a flicker of hope, as he recounts testimonials of miraculous recoveries, of lives transformed. The eloquent sales pitch, the exotic-sounding ingredients, the sheer confidence of the seller, all would exert a powerful pull. The reality, of course, was often far darker. Many of these patent medicines were useless, and some were actively harmful, often containing high doses of alcohol, opium, or even dangerous heavy metals like mercury and arsenic. Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup, for example, was heavily laced with morphine, effectively sedating infants and sometimes leading to accidental overdose or long-term addiction. You, unaware of the active ingredients, would administer it to your crying child, believing you were providing comfort and relief, when in fact you were inadvertently turning them into an addict or putting their life at risk. This pervasive market for quackery stemmed from a desperate need. As we've discussed, Victorian medicine, though slowly advancing, was still in its infancy. Doctors had limited tools to combat disease, and many illnesses, particularly chronic ones, offered little hope of genuine cure. When conventional medicine failed or was too expensive for the working poor, people turned to these readily available, aggressively advertised remedies. You would feel the profound despair of illness, the ache of chronic pain, the terror of watching a loved one waste away, and the desperate hope that this bottle, this pill, might finally offer salvation. Beyond patent medicines, the Victorians were captivated by a range of pseudo-scientific theories that offered alternative explanations for health and disease. Phrenology, for instance, was incredibly popular. Imagine having your head meticulously measured and read by a phrenologist who would feel the bumps and contours of your skull to divine your character, your talents, and even your propensity for certain behaviors or illnesses. You'd listen intently as they described your innate generosity, your strong intellect, or your potential for criminality, believing that your very skull held the secrets to your personality and destiny. This offered a comforting, albeit false, sense of understanding and self-knowledge. Mesmerism, a precursor to hypnotism, also held immense allure. Practitioners claimed to channel a universal animal magnetism to heal illnesses, alleviate pain, and even control minds. You might attend a public demonstration, watching in awe as a mesmerist seemingly put someone into a trance or used his magnetic passes to cure a chronic ailment. The theatricality, the mystery, the promise of extraordinary power, all made mesmerism a compelling spectacle and a sought-after therapy. Despite lacking any scientific basis, the fascination extended to other bizarre theories. You might encounter advertisements for electrical belts or galvanic rings designed to cure everything from rheumatism to impotence by supposedly channeling beneficial electrical currents through the body. Or read about hydrotherapy, which, while sometimes beneficial, often involved extreme and unpleasant regimens of cold baths and water treatments for various ailments. The language of science, even if poorly understood, lent an air of credibility to these often ridiculous claims. The Victorian era also saw the rise of various healing cults and alternative health movements. From vegetarianism to hydropathy, these movements offered holistic approaches to health, often rejecting conventional medicine as invasive or ineffective. You might adopt a new diet, embrace cold baths, or follow a strict regimen of exercise, convinced that these practices held the key to true well-being, separate from the often harsh and painful treatments of traditional doctors. The reason for this widespread gullibility wasn't a lack of intelligence, but a lack of information and regulation. There were no government agencies to test the efficacy or safety of these products. Advertising was unregulated and often wildly exaggerated, and the scientific method, particularly in medicine, was still evolving. You would be bombarded with persuasive advertisements in newspapers, pamphlets, and posters, making it incredibly difficult to distinguish genuine cures from elaborate deceptions. This obsession reveals a deep-seated human need for control over one's own health and a profound optimism in the power of invention and discovery. Even if the science was flawed, the belief in its potential was immense. For many, these pseudo-scientific remedies and theories offered a sense of hope and agency in a world where illness was often terrifying and incurable. So, as you rest tonight, consider the Victorian obsession with charlatans and pseudo-science. It was a testament to their vulnerability, their suffering, and their desperate longing for answers in an age of limited medical understanding. It reminds you of the crucial role of scientific rigor and consumer protection in your own world, and how easily even intelligent societies can be led astray by the promise of magic cures when faced with the relentless realities of illness and human fragility. Tonight, we draw back the grimy curtain on one of the most brutal and morally challenging obsessions of the Victorian era: the pervasive, often devastating, exploitation of child labour and the silent screams that echoed through the workshops, factories and mines of industrial Britain. You, in your modern world of child protection laws and compulsory education, can hardly conceive of a time when children as young as 4 or 5 years old were considered a vital, expendable part of the workforce, their innocent lives sacrificed at the altar of industrial progress. Imagine yourself a child in a Victorian factory town. You are not at school dreaming of futures.
Instead, your day begins before dawn, summoned by the piercing shriek of the factory whistle.
Your small, nimble fingers are prized assets. In the textile mills, you are a piecer, tasked with crawling under dangerous, fast-moving machinery to tie broken threads, your tiny body the only one small enough to fit into the cramped spaces. The air is thick with cotton dust, choking your lungs, and the incessant roar of the looms deafens you. You'd feel the constant terror of the machinery, the threat of your hair or clothes getting caught, leading to horrific injury or death. The exhaustion would be bone deep, your eyes burning, your tiny muscles aching with an intensity no child should ever know. In the coal mines, your fate might be even grimmer. As a trapper boy or girl, you would sit alone in the absolute darkness for 12 hours a day, opening and closing ventilation doors as coal wagons passed. The chilling silence, broken only by the drip of water and the scuttling of rats, would be punctuated by the terrifying rumble of approaching wagons. Or you might be a hurrier crawling through narrow, dangerous tunnels, dragging heavy baskets of coal on your hands and knees, the chains around your waist chafing your skin raw. You'd feel the damp, cold earth pressing in on you, the claustrophobia, the fear of roof collapses, and the constant, gnawing hunger. This wasn't just an isolated tragedy. It was a systemic obsession driven by the insatiable demand for cheap labor and the prevailing economic philosophy that children were simply smaller, less expensive versions of adult workers. You would see children everywhere in the workforce, sweeping chimneys, a particularly dangerous occupation, leading to deformities and cancer, selling newspapers on the street, working as domestic servants in often abusive conditions, or toiling in match factories, where the phosphorus fumes caused horrific diseases like phossy jaw, a painful and disfiguring necrosis of the jawbone. The moral justification for child labor was often cloaked in rhetoric about teaching discipline, alleviating poverty, and preventing idleness. You might hear arguments that children from poor families were better off working than becoming vagrants, or that hard work built character. The sheer volume of impoverished families struggling to survive meant that every extra pair of hands, no matter how small, was essential to stave off starvation.
You, as a parent,
would face the agonizing choice between sending your child into dangerous work or watching your entire family starve. The living conditions for these child laborers were often as brutal as their work. They would live in overcrowded, unsanitary tenements, sleeping on straw mattresses, barely fed, suffering from chronic illness and malnutrition. You'd see their stunted growth, their prematurely aged faces, their bodies scarred and deformed by years of relentless toil. Their childhoods, as you understand them, simply did not exist. There was no time for play, no opportunity for education, only the relentless cycle of work and exhaustion. The initial attempts at reform were met with fierce resistance from factory owners who profited immensely from child labor. They argued that restrictions would damage the economy, increase costs, and make British industry uncompetitive. You would read their indignant letters in the newspapers arguing against what they saw as unwarranted government interference in the free market. The sheer power of the industrial lobby often stalled meaningful change for decades. However, the growing awareness of the horrific conditions slowly stirred the public conscience. Social reformers, philanthropists, and parliamentary commissions began to expose the brutal realities. You would read their shocking reports filled with eyewitness accounts of children mutilated by machinery, stunted by malnutrition, and dying from preventable diseases. The imagery of the innocent child suffering touched a nerve in Victorian society, sparking outrage and calls for reform. The series of Factory Acts, slowly introduced throughout the Victorian era, gradually chipped away at the worst excesses of child labour. These acts limited working hours, set minimum ages, and mandated basic education for child workers. You would witness the slow, arduous process of legislative change, each small victory hard won against powerful vested interests. It was a testament to the persistent efforts of reformers who refused to let the silent screams of these children go unheard. This moral awakening was also intertwined with the rise of the concept of childhood itself, not as a miniature adult, but as a distinct period requiring protection, education, and play. This shift in perception, driven by both social reform and evolving psychological understanding, gradually transformed societal attitudes towards children, laying the groundwork for the protections you now take for granted. So, as you prepare for sleep tonight, consider the Victorian obsession with child labour and the immense human cost of industrial progress. It reminds you of the profound moral challenges that arise from unchecked economic ambition and the long, difficult struggle to secure basic human rights. The image of those tiny hands toiling in darkness, their cries unheard, is a stark reminder of the fragile nature of innocence and the enduring responsibility of society to protect its most vulnerable. Tonight, we peer behind the heavy oak doors and into the hushed, smoke-filled rooms where another powerful Victorian obsession thrived, secret societies and elite clubs. You, in your interconnected, often transparent world, might find the concept of exclusive brotherhoods bound by arcane rituals and hidden agendas both intriguing and unsettling. For the Victorians, these organizations weren't just social gatherings. They were vital networks of power, influence, and identity, providing a sense of belonging, purpose, and veiled mystery in an increasingly impersonal world. Imagine yourself a Victorian gentleman living in an era of rapid social change where traditional hierarchies were being challenged by new wealth and shifting demographics. You might find solace and advantage in joining a secret society like the Freemasons, a brotherhood steeped in ancient traditions and symbolic rituals. You would undergo initiation rites veiled in mystery, learning secret handshakes, passwords, and allegories that bound you to your fellow members. The sense of belonging, of being part of something larger and older than yourself, would be profoundly comforting. Freemasonry, arguably the most prominent secret society, flourished during the Victorian era. Its lodges, often grand and architecturally imposing, were places where men from different social strata, merchants, lawyers, doctors, even minor nobility, could meet on equal footing, bound by shared principles of morality, charity, and mutual support. You would feel the power of this network, knowing that a fellow Mason could offer assistance, business connections, or even protection in a world that could be unforgiving. This wasn't just a social club. It was a potent force in shaping careers and influence. The secrecy itself was a huge part of the allure. The arcane rituals, the veiled symbols, the sworn oaths of silence, all lent an air of mystique and importance to membership. You would delight in the knowledge that you possessed secrets unknown to the uninitiated, fostering a sense of exclusivity and shared identity. This element of hidden knowledge appealed to the Victorian fascination with the occult and the esoteric, offering a sense of deeper meaning beyond the mundane. Beyond Freemasonry, countless other friendly societies, benevolent orders, and more overtly, political secret societies existed. You might be part of an Odd Fellows Lodge, dedicated to mutual aid and community support, providing benefits in times of illness or death. Or perhaps, if you were Irish, you might join a Fenian brotherhood, operating in secret to advocate for Irish independence, risking imprisonment or worse. These societies often served as crucial support networks for working-class individuals, offering a safety net that the state largely failed to provide. Elite gentlemen's clubs, though not secret in the same mystical sense, operated with a similar ethos of exclusivity and unspoken rules. Clubs like the Athenaeum, the Reform Club, or Brooks's were bastions of power and privilege, where politicians, writers, and industrialists gathered to socialize, network, and conduct discreet business. You would seek membership in such a club not just for comfort, but for the invaluable connections and access it provided. The hushed atmosphere, the leather armchairs, the scent of cigar smoke and aged brandy all contributed to an aura of quiet power and influence. Within these clubs, conversations flowed freely, deals were struck, and reputations were made or broken, all away from the prying eyes of the public. You would feel the weight of unspoken codes, the subtle hierarchy, the precise etiquette that governed every interaction. These clubs were extensions of the home for many bachelors, offering luxurious amenities, libraries, dining rooms, and a sense of fraternity denied to women. The growth of these secret societies and clubs reflected a desire for community and shared purpose in an increasingly fragmented and rapidly changing world. As traditional social structures shifted, these organizations offered a sense of stability, identity, and shared values. You would find comfort in the camaraderie, the shared rituals, and the mutual support, knowing that you were part of a chosen few. For those outside these exclusive circles, the mystery and perceived power of secret societies often fueled suspicion and paranoia. You might read sensationalized accounts in the popular press about shadowy cabals pulling strings behind the scenes, or hear whispers of sinister plots hatched in darkened lodges. This fear of the unknown, of hidden influences, was a constant undercurrent in Victorian society, adding to the allure and fascination with these veiled brotherhoods. Even in literature, secret societies often played a pivotal role, adding intrigue and suspense to plots. From Masonic conspiracies in adventure novels to shadowy criminal organizations, the idea of hidden groups working towards unseen ends captured the Victorian imagination, reflecting their simultaneous yearning for order and their suspicion of covert power. So, as you drift towards sleep tonight, consider the Victorian obsession with secret societies and elite clubs. It was a complex blend of tradition, ambition, and the enduring human need for belonging and influence. It reminds you that even in a seemingly ordered and public society, much of its true power and many of its true desires operate in the shadows, bound by unspoken rules and the enduring allure of a shared secret. Tonight, we escape the sooty confines of the city and venture into the lush, wild heart of the Victorian psyche, revealing an almost fervent obsession with nature, particularly the captivating world of botany. You, accustomed to easy access to diverse flora, might not fully grasp the thrill of discovery, the scientific zeal, and the profound aesthetic pleasure that Victorians derived from the natural world, fueling a mania for collecting, cultivating, and displaying plants that bordered on an ardent passion. Imagine yourself a Victorian lady confined largely to the domestic sphere. Your life is circumscribed by social expectations, but a vibrant living world exists just beyond your drawing room window and within the pages of illustrated botanical journals. You might become swept up in pteridomania, the fern craze, collecting specimens from local woodlands, carefully pressing them and arranging them in elaborate albums. Your drawing room might boast a fernery, a miniature indoor garden under glass, where exotic ferns thrived in the humid air, their delicate fronds casting intricate shadows. You'd feel the quiet satisfaction of nurturing these living things, finding beauty and order in their intricate patterns. This wasn't just a genteel hobby, it was a scientific pursuit. The Victorian era saw an explosion of interest in natural history, driven by voyages of exploration and the groundbreaking theories of Darwin. You would read thrilling accounts of botanists venturing into dangerous, unexplored territories, the Amazonian rainforests, the remote mountains of the Himalayas, risking their lives to discover new species of orchids, rhododendrons, and other exotic plants. These plant hunters became heroes, their adventures fueling a public hunger for the rare and the beautiful. The obsession with orchids, in particular, was legendary. These exotic, often strikingly beautiful flowers, imported from tropical climates, became symbols of wealth, status, and refined taste. You would attend exclusive orchid shows, marveling at the vibrant colors and intricate forms, knowing that some specimens commanded astronomical prices, often exceeding the annual salary of a working man. Cultivating them was a delicate art, requiring specialized glasshouses, precise temperature control, and immense patience. Owning a rare orchid was a statement, a tangible link to distant, wild lands and a display of your horticultural prowess. For the gentleman of means, collecting and cultivating plants was a serious scientific and intellectual pursuit. You might spend hours in your private botanical garden, meticulously tending to newly acquired specimens, crossbreeding varieties, and documenting your observations. The study of botany wasn't just about pretty flowers. It was about understanding the fundamental processes of life, the interconnectedness of species, and the very mechanisms of evolution. You would feel the intellectual thrill of contributing to scientific knowledge, of unraveling nature's secrets. The design and construction of glasshouses and conservatories became an art form in itself. Structures like the Palm House at Kew Gardens, a magnificent iron and glass cathedral of plants, allowed tropical flora to flourish in the temperate British climate. You would wander through these architectural marvels, feeling transported to a distant jungle, the air thick with humidity and the scent of exotic blooms. It was a fusion of engineering prowess and botanical passion, a celebration of humanity's ability to control and display nature's wonders. This botanical obsession also intertwined with the grand narrative of empire. Plant hunters often accompanied colonial expeditions, bringing back not just ornamental plants, but also commercially valuable crops like rubber, tea, and quinine. You would understand, perhaps implicitly, that the beauty of your garden was sometimes built upon the exploitation of distant lands and indigenous knowledge, a complex blend of aesthetic appreciation and economic ambition. For many Victorians, nature offered a spiritual balm, a retreat from the noise and grime of industrial cities. Walking in a carefully cultivated garden, sketching wildflowers, or simply observing the intricate beauty of a single leaf provided solace and a sense of connection to a world larger than human invention. You would find peace in the cyclical rhythms of growth and decay, a quiet contemplation that contrasted sharply with the relentless pace of modern life. The literature and art of the era reflected this deep appreciation for nature. Poets romanticized the English countryside, artists depicted lush landscapes, and botanical illustrations became exquisitely detailed works of art. You would leaf through beautifully bound books of floral prints, each image a testament to the patient observation and artistic skill dedicated to capturing nature's ephemeral beauty. So, as you close your eyes tonight, consider the Victorian obsession with nature and botany. It was a profound connection to the living world, driven by scientific curiosity, aesthetic pleasure, imperial ambition, and a spiritual yearning for peace and order. It reminds you of the enduring human need to explore, understand and cherish the natural environment, a secret passion that blossomed in glass houses and quiet gardens, enriching their lives and leaving a legacy of horticultural wonders for your own. Tonight, our final journey into the Victorian psyche brings us to perhaps their most intimate and complex obsession, the human body itself. You, living in an age where the body is openly discussed, meticulously studied, and endlessly displayed, might find it challenging to grasp the profound paradox that gripped the Victorians. A society that simultaneously shrouded the body in layers of moralistic taboo, while, at the same time, was utterly fascinated by its inner workings, its flaws, and its potential, driving both scientific advancement and societal anxieties. Imagine yourself a Victorian. Your body, particularly if you are a woman, is a site of immense social control and unspoken rules. Modesty is paramount. Every limb, every curve, every natural function is to be concealed, not just by clothing, but by a pervasive cultural silence. Public display of the body, even of an ankle or a wrist, can be deemed scandalous. You would live under a constant gaze of judgment, your very physicality a potential source of moral transgression. The natural processes of your body, menstruation, childbirth, sexual urges, are either ignored, pathologized, or whispered about in euphemisms, leaving you in a state of profound ignorance and often shame. Yet, beneath these layers of prudery, a powerful scientific revolution was unfolding. Driven by an insatiable curiosity about the very anatomical structures that society deemed unmentionable, you would hear about the grim realities of medical schools where anatomists toiled over cadavers, often acquired through dubious means, to understand the intricate machinery of human life. The act of dissection, though grisly, was seen as essential for medical progress, slowly unraveling the mysteries of disease and the complex interplay of organs. You might be horrified by the accounts, but you would also acknowledge the necessity of such work for the advancement of health. The fear of disease, as we discussed, spurred this intense scrutiny. Doctors sought to understand the mechanisms of illness, the pathways of infection, the effects of disease on internal organs. Autopsies, often conducted with grim determination, became crucial tools for diagnosis and scientific discovery, turning the dead into teachers for the living. You would view the human body in this context not just as a vessel for the soul, but as a complex biological system prone to malfunction, requiring scientific understanding to repair. This scientific curiosity, however, often veered into pseudo-science and unsettling practices. Phrenology, the belief that skull shape revealed character, was a prime example. You might visit a phrenologist who, after meticulously feeling your scalp, would declare you to be intelligent, artistic, or prone to fits of temper based on the bumps and depressions of your skull. This offered a comforting, albeit false, sense of understanding one's inner self through external physical traits, appealing to the Victorian desire for categorization and self-knowledge. The emerging field of anthropology also focused intensely on the human body, particularly when studying other races. Colonial expansion brought Victorians into contact with diverse populations, leading to intense, often racist, attempts to categorize and rank human bodies based on supposed racial characteristics. You might encounter scientific papers detailing skull measurements, skin color, and physical attributes, all used to justify racial hierarchies and imperial dominance. This was a dark side of scientific curiosity, demonstrating how even objective study could be twisted to support prevailing prejudices. The obsession with the body also manifested in fashion, particularly for women. The corset, that infamous garment, was not just about aesthetics. It was a tool for reshaping and controlling the female form, creating an idealized, often unhealthy, silhouette. You would feel the constriction around your waist, the pressure on your organs, the difficulty breathing, all in the name of conforming to a rigid beauty standard. This was a physical manifestation of society's desire to contain and sculpt the female body into an acceptable form, suppressing its natural functions and potential for rebellion. Beyond the visible body, the Victorians were deeply concerned with nervous energy and the inner workings of the mind, often conceived in physical terms. Conditions like neurasthenia, nervous exhaustion, or hysteria were seen as physical ailments stemming from overwork, moral weakness, or the stresses of modern life. Treatments often involved rest cures, electrical stimulation, or even surgical interventions on reproductive organs, reflecting a profound misunderstanding of the intricate link between mind and body. You might find yourself prescribed a strict regimen of bed rest, forced to avoid any intellectual stimulation in an attempt to restore your delicate nervous system. The human body, then, was a battleground of conflicting forces, the deeply ingrained taboos of a highly moralistic society versus the relentless curiosity of burgeoning science. It was an object of shame, a source of suffering, a canvas for fashion, a subject of scientific inquiry, and a tool for social control. It was the ultimate mystery, hidden beneath layers of clothing and social etiquette, yet constantly revealing its secrets through illness, reproduction, and the unstoppable march of scientific discovery. As you now drift into the quiet space of sleep, reflect on this final, profound Victorian obsession with the human body. It reminds you of the enduring human quest to understand ourselves, our physical limitations, and the complex relationship between our bodies, our minds, and the societies we inhabit. It highlights how far we have come in liberating the body from shame and embracing scientific understanding, but also how deeply ingrained cultural norms can shape our most intimate sense of self. A secret struggle that defined an entire era and continues to resonate in the quiet corners of your own modern world.